You know that feeling, right? You're walking to a room with a purpose, and suddenly, poof, it's gone. Or my personal favorite, you meet someone new, and their name just evaporates from your brain seconds later. It feels like a glitch, a total system failure. But what if I told you that forgetting isn't a bug? What if it's actually a feature? Well, today we're going to dig in and unlock those secrets. Seriously, think about it. The last time you were introduced to someone, you shake their hand, you smile, you say, "So nice to meet you," and literally a minute later, you have no clue what their name is. You're just hoping you don't have to say it again. So what gives? Is our memory just bad?
Well, here's the wild part. The answer is no. Your memory isn't necessarily flawed. The problem isn't that you forgot their name, it's that you never really learned it to begin with. Your brain was just too busy juggling other things, like making a good impression, thinking about what you're going to say next, not looking awkward. The name itself never got properly filed away, or as psychologists say, it was never encoded.
Okay, so to really wrap our heads around this, we got to understand how memory even works. I want you to picture it like a little information factory in your brain. It's an assembly line, and it has three really big, really distinct jobs that have to happen in perfect order.
So these three jobs are encoding, storage, and retrieval. It's just like using a computer, really. Encoding is you typing the words onto the screen. Storage is you hitting the save button. And retrieval, that's you finding and opening that file later on. Now here's the key. If any one of those steps fails, the memory is just gone. So let's double down on that first step, because it's absolutely crucial. Encoding. This is all about getting the information into your brain in the first place. You can't save a document you never typed, right? Same thing here. You can't store a memory you never actually paid attention to. So, that name you forgot, your brain was distracted. You never really hit record. All right, so let's say you do successfully encode a memory. Where does it actually go? Well, a couple of psychologists, Atkinson and Shiffrin, came up with this really famous model that kind of maps it all out. They figured our memory has three different storage bins, and each one has its own specific job. And this is basically the blueprint. See how the information flows? Everything starts in what's called our sensory memory. If we decide to pay attention to it, it gets promoted to our short-term memory. You can think of that like your computer's temporary RAM. And then, if we decide that information is really important, it gets saved to long-term memory, which is like the massive, permanent hard drive. So let's start at the very beginning. Sensory memory. This is a huge but incredibly short-lived holding pen for, well, for everything your senses are picking up right this second. And when I say short-lived, I mean it lasts for less than a second. Have you ever waved a sparkler around in the dark? You see that perfect circle of light, right? That's your sensory memory, holding on to the image of that spark just long enough for your brain to connect the dots. Pretty cool.
Now, out of that massive flood of sights and sounds, anything you actually focus your attention on gets moved into short-term memory. This is your brain's scratch pad. But here's the catch. It can only hold a handful of things at a time, and only for about 20 seconds. If you want to keep something in there, you have to actively work at it, rehearse it. Like when you repeat a phone number over and over again until you can find a pen to write it down. And finally, we get to the main event, long-term memory. If you rehearse that information, if you think about it and connect it to things you already know, it can move into this vast, permanent storehouse. And when I say vast, I mean it. LTM has a virtually unlimited capacity. It can hold memories for your entire life, everything from what you had for breakfast yesterday to the smell of your childhood home. Okay, so if we have this incredible, sophisticated system for storing memories, why are we so darn forgetful? Well, it turns out forgetting isn't just one thing. It's more like a breakdown that can happen at a bunch of different points along that assembly line we just talked about. Psychologists have identified a few usual suspects when it comes to forgetting. We already talked a lot about ineffective encoding. That's a big one. But there's also simple decay, where a memory just fades over time. Then there's interference, where memories get tangled up with each other. And retrieval failure. That's when the memory's in there, you just can't find it. Let's look at a couple of the most fascinating culprits. All right, let's try a little experiment. I want you to take a really good look at this picture of an office. Burn it into your brain. Got it? Okay, now look away. Don't cheat. So, what did you see? I'm sure you saw a desk, a chair, maybe a computer, but what about books? Were there any books? So, did you remember seeing books? If you did, you're in good company. Most people do. Except, there are no books in that picture, not a single one. This happens because of something called a schema.
Your brain has this mental blueprint for what an office is supposed to look like, and that blueprint probably includes bookshelves. So your memory helpfully adds them in to make the scene fit your expectations. It's proof that our memories aren't perfect video recordings, they're creative reconstruction.
Another huge reason we forget is interference. This is basically when your memories just get jumbled up and trip over each other. There's proactive interference. That's when old info messes with new info. It's the reason it's so hard to remember your new phone number because your old one is still rattling around in your head. Then there's retroactive interference, which is the opposite. New info makes you forget the old stuff, like when studying for Wednesday's test completely wipes out what you learned for Tuesday's. And then, oh my gosh, we have to talk about maybe the most frustrating kind of forgetting. Retrieval failure. This is that classic, maddening tip-of-the-tongue feeling. You know the information is in there somewhere. You can feel it. You just can't grab it. But then someone gives you a tiny hint, like the first letter of an actor's name, and boom, the whole thing comes flooding back. The memory wasn't gone. The pathway to it was just temporarily out of order.
So we know why we forget, but how fast does it happen? For that, we have to go back to the 19th century and meet this incredibly dedicated psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus. This guy was obsessed. To study memory scientifically, he spent years memorizing thousands of nonsense syllables, things like zoff and vuck, and then he meticulously recorded how long it took him to forget them.
So what did all that painstaking work reveal? Let's just start with this one number, 58%. Any guesses what that is? That is the average amount of new information you still remember just 20 minutes after you learn it. 20 minutes. That means you've already lost over 40% in less time than it takes to watch an episode of your favorite show.
And here's the full picture. This is the famous Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. I mean, just look at that nosedive right at the beginning. His research showed pretty definitively that we lose the vast majority of new information really quickly. Over 60% is gone in less than 9 hours. The drop is incredibly steep at first, and then it starts to level off.
So the big takeaway from his mountain of research, this monumental effort, is this one simple but really powerful idea. Most of the forgetting we're ever going to do happens almost immediately after we learn something. Look, it is so easy to think of forgetting as a failure, right? A weakness in our design. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if it's not a bug at all, but an essential feature? Maybe our brains are actually designed to forget, to clear out all the old, outdated, irrelevant stuff to make room for what's new and important. Maybe forgetting is the very thing that allows us to learn, to adapt, and to focus on what truly matters now. It's a pretty wild thought, isn't it?